we have tonight a stalwart in the faith. I've not seen this gentleman in a very long time, but he's not a stranger to us at Grace. He's the one and only Reverend Clinton Chisholm. I'll give you a little synopsis on him. He'll be leading tonight our Bible study in the absence of our pastor, Reverend Mark Dawes, who is at a pastor's retreat. And so he decided to stand in and take us through a session that looks at creation, but in the context of evolution. I think he likes apologetics. He has done a lot of studies in it, and I think he is a good person to discuss this topic with us. Reverend Chisholm is the holder of an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree from the Caribbean Graduate School of Theology. He's a fellow in Christian Apologetics, which is FCA, from the International Academy of Apologetics, Evangelism and Human Rights, Strasbourg, France, which was founded and still run by John Warwick Montgomery. Professor Montgomery said of Reverend Chisholm's candidacy for the FCA, and I quote, "In the written exam, Chisholm got one of the highest marks and gave the best fellows defense in the history of the academy." He holds a Master's of Arts in Christian Apologetics with the highest honor from Biola University, and an MA, Masters of Arts, in Biblical Language from Sheffield University in the United Kingdom. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts from the University of the West Indies, focuses on theology, and he also holds a BTH, yes, in honors and that is from the Jamaica Theological Seminary. Reverend Chisholm is not just sticking to that. Many of us who know of him know that he's also a trained musician, and he holds 2 music diplomas. He holds a licentiate of the Royal School of Music, and an associate of Trinity College, London. Reverend Chisholm is the author of 4 books, the latest being A Controversial Clergyman and the previously Revelations on Rastafari. He said both books are available on Amazon.com. So tonight we welcome Reverend Chisholm. Yes, Rev, you're on.
Good evening, brethren. Thanks so very much for the invitation to fill in as a cardboard for a real window pane for my dear friend, Pastor Mark. My honor to serve. I'm going to be sharing material which cannot be contained within the hour, but the video clips are available through Brother Rattray, I think his name is, and at your leisure or leader's leisure, you can watch the fullness of the video clips. I'll just use pieces of them in the interest of time. So let me just allow me to share screen, please. Can I go ahead?
Yes, you can go ahead, Rev.
Thanks. Let me see if I can find this thing with my bad eye. All right, if you're seeing that, I'm going to read you through the material. You'll have the handout as well, and a supplementary handout. This is part 1. All right, so we're looking at evolution versus intelligent design. Are you hearing me all right?
Yes, Rev, we're hearing you.
Yes, we're hearing you.
There's a question in the chat. I don't know how you want to handle the question. Somebody's asking to define apologetics.
Apologetics, or let's just deal with that right away. It's the defense of the faith. Apologetics is drawn from a Greek word, which means to offer a rational, logical defense of something. You don't only have Christian apologists, you have Muslim apologists, political apologists, and apologists, a defender of some idea. and that person is supposed to argue it rationally, logically. So it's a Christian ministry helping Christians to understand how to defend their faith logically, rationally, and respectfully, and also to clear away cobwebs from the minds of non-Christians about what Christian truth claims really are about. All right, so let's go through this now. As I share, feel free as I tell people, I'm not the fourth member of the Trinity, and therefore I can be wrong. I don't ask you to agree with me, just to hear and understand by raising a question about what I'm saying. And then you can always check the background to see if what I said to you stands up to scrutiny. Clear disclosure, I'm not a scientist. I was going to say a trained scientist. I'm not a scientist by any means, but I've read quite a bit in my trafficking through apologetics, scientific, legal, and moral. I've had to read quite a few books on it. So evolution versus intelligent design, part 1. Fundamental issue. Finding a theory or theories to explain two things. A, the origin, and B, the information-rich complexity of all living things. Give you a puzzling quotation from the atheist, rabid atheist biologist Richard Dawkins of Oxford. He says, quote, at the molecular genetic level, every single one of more than 1 trillion cells in the body contains about 1,000 times as much precisely coded digital information as my entire computer. The complexity of living organisms is matched by the elegant efficiency of their apparent design. Notice that adjectival, apparent design. If anyone doesn't agree that this amount of complex design cries out for explanation, I give up, end quote. In his book, The Blind Watchmaker, 1996. So which theory qualifies as the inference to the best explanation and has the best explanatory scope and power? Evolution or intelligent design? The essence and scope of the search for a theory or theories I qualify with 2 pointers. Scope, explanatory scope, relates to the theory's ability to explain all or most of the major issues involved. And power relates to the theory's ability to explain adequately all or most of the major issues involved. Very important, ability to explain all or most, and the ability to explain adequately all or most, not just giving a passing little proof and then expect you to just swallow it because it was given by a double PhD person. Must do it adequately and cover all or most of the major issues involved in the search for a theory to explain the origin and the information-rich complexity of all living things. Clarifying natural. As used in natural selection, the nuance is minus a rational purposive dimension. Scientists usually argue by whether the origin of the universe by chance or chemical evolution by chance or biological evolution by chance. But can I tell you, philosophically, chances are nothing. It's not a substance. It cannot do anything at all. We use chance loosely. We should learn to use it better linguistically. Chance is just used when we mean it was not planned by anybody. So if I bump into Sister Arlene in Sovereign by chance, it does mean that a force called chance brought Sister Arlene and me together. No, it's just that it was not planned. The search then is for natural versus intelligent causes or natural versus logical causes, not natural versus supernatural causes, as William Dembski in his book, Intelligent Design, makes that point quite importantly. Basic concepts now, 3.1. Evolutionists argue for two basic related things. Biochemical evolution, the coming into being of the first life from non-life. So their argument is that non-living things can give rise to life and has given rise to life. They need to prove that adequately and fully to our satisfaction. Then there's biological evolution, the coming into being of all organisms from one or more common ancestors, so that single-celled organisms evolved into invertebrate animals and plants. then vertebrate fish, then amphibians, then reptiles, then birds and lower mammals, then primates, then humans. But note this very carefully. Biological evolution is absolutely and critically dependent on biochemical evolution. And I'm using my language very carefully. And I want you to mention that this is absolutely indispensable. The one rests crucially, critically, or precariously on the other. If you cannot prove biochemical evolution, biological evolution is, in horse racing terms, a late non-starter. If biochemical evolution is wrong, so is biological evolution. Two quotable quotes. Quote, the supposed creative force called natural selection could not have played any part until there was reproduction. Luther Sunderland. It's a common sense biological point. If things can't reproduce, natural selection is dead in the water. You can't even invoke it in explaining anything. Because until you can reproduce, you can't have the survival of the fittest. Reproduction has to do with animals reproducing, and those who are less fit are killed off or die off, and then the fitter ones or the fittest ones will survive to bring out offspring. Sir Fred Hoyle, no Christian, but a reputable astronomer, philosopher, once said, quote, the chance that higher life forms might have emerged by natural selection and chance, that humbug word again, is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. If there's no material scientist, person who would make airplanes there to assemble the pieces, you're not going to just leave it there, a tornado or rushing wind passes through and just miraculously or magically assemble a Boeing 747. It's just ludicrous to think that that could even possibly happen, let alone really happen. 3.2, intelligent design theorists argue that the coming into being of living things with such informational complexity, even at the level of a cell, requires intelligence. As Dembski puts it, quote, intelligent design properly formulated is a theory of information. Intelligent design thereby becomes a theory for detecting and measuring information, explaining its origin and tracing its flow, end quote. And his book is highly recommended, Intelligent Design. I had two, in an earlier draft of this, I had two revealing video clips, but once we got Evolution's Achilles heels downloaded and transferred to Ballaratri, I'm going to skip these two revealing video clips. They will be subsumed in some of the ones I'll appeal to from Evolution's Achilles heels. So we're going to test the theories now to see which one is most likely the inference to the best explanation of what we see in terms of the origin of life and the information-rich complexity of all living things. So 4.1, origins. Did life appear from non-life? Now, ask Brother Ratri now to pull up the video clip, Evolution's Achilles heels. I can only play maybe 5 or so minutes of each. And then if time is left over, then we can go back. Apart from your questions and comments, we can go back to revisit one of these video clips. Let me.
The general theory of evolution says that all living things came from a single cell, and that cell came from something like a primordial soup. And for me as a chemist, the hardest problem for evolution is the origin of first life from non-living chemicals, and this is commonly called chemical evolution.
Most people have heard of the Miller-Urey experiment, and it's in most textbooks still today. They wanted to see if organic molecules could come from inorganic precursors. So they took some simple chemicals and they ran them through a spark chamber. And most of the products they got really amounted to nothing more than a brown tar, because random chemical reactions produced random molecules. And yeah, they found a few amino acids, but in a mixture of left and right-handed forms. But what they didn't find are certain specific amino acids that are critical for life. They didn't find nucleotides. They didn't find any large biomolecules.
To get living things, we need lots of huge molecules, and that means we have to get little molecules to combine into big molecules. And the problem is that chemicals don't react in that way. Everything I've learned in real chemistry shows that the reactions go in the opposite way from what's required for life to come from non-living chemicals. Any chemist trying to do that would not have water in the reaction, because water tends to drive the reaction in the opposite direction towards the little molecules, and yet the primordial soup would inevitably have loads of water in it. So it's the last place any real chemist would try to make proteins or DNA. Another problem with chemical evolution is called the chirality problem. Now, amino acids in proteins and sugars in DNA come in two mirror image forms, like your left hand and right hand. But all the amino acids in our body are left-handed, and all the sugars in DNA are right-handed. But a primordial soup would have an equal number of both, and it's quite complicated to get a single-handed mixture. And a primordial soup does not have that know-how, and therefore it's totally unsuitable for the origin of life.
The most common scenario for the evolutionary origin of life is called the RNA world. Here they imagine an ocean or a lake full of RNA molecules that are able to reproduce themselves and that slowly evolve into the first reproducing organism. The RNA world is a desperate attempt, a last straw, a grasping at nothing, and it is completely unscientific.
There's no RNA that can copy itself from its individual building blocks without a protein to help it do that. And so for evolutionists to claim that RNA world is possible is dishonest.
To make it even worse, RNA is more unstable than DNA. In your cells, there are about 1 million DNA breaks every day. Most of those are fixed by the unbelievably intricate and amazing repair systems in the cell. But if RNA is less stable than DNA, and DNA requires exquisite repair systems to survive over time, how on earth can an RNA world be plausible?
Also, the building blocks of RNA are threefold. You've got a sugar, a base, and phosphate. And naturally, these things don't combine to form the nucleotide bases needed for RNA. So right from the start, you've got a problem in trying to get even the building blocks of RNA. And the components of the building blocks are very unstable. Ribose and the bases decompose really quickly.
Enzymes are also needed as a catalyst in the cell, and RNA can do this to a very limited extent, which is why the evolutionist appeals to this initial RNA world idea. But the reality is that in living cells, protein-based enzymes do most of the work. So life somehow had to switch from RNA enzymes, for which there is only very limited support, to these incredible protein enzymes. How and when did that occur?
An enzyme is a molecule, it's actually a catalyst that makes a reaction go much faster without being consumed in the process. I mean, there are some very important enzymes essential for life that speed up the reaction by 10 to the power of 18 times, which means a reaction that goes in about 1/100th of a second in living things would take millions or billions of years to happen without the enzymes. So you need these enzymes for life to exist. If natural selection can't explain these enzymes, all evolutionists have is chance. So is the chance feasible? Well, consider even the simplest possible living thing would have to have over 350 enzymes to work. And the enzymes are made of a very precise sequence of amino acids. Now, we could be very generous to the evolutionists and assume only 10 amino acids in each enzyme have to be exact. Now, work out the probability of, say, 350 enzymes with only 10 amino acids each enzyme being exactly right. The chance there is like guessing a 5,000-digit PIN the first time. Even a 4-digit PIN on your bank card is supposed to be enough protection for you, and the bank will tell you if someone got it right, you must have left it lying around somewhere. It didn't happen by chance. So how much more a 5,000-digit PIN? It's not going to be guessed by chance.
All right, let's hold it there, please. All right, so let me share and continue, and then I'll do the other click. Where? All right, so now, so the origin of life. Notice the invoking of chance. I hope he would have gone on to indicate that chances are nothing. It's really no thing. It's not a substance. It can't do anything at all. We just appeal to, when you say the origin of the universe came into by Big Bang by chance, you can leave out the by chance because you have not added anything sensible to how the origin of the world came about. With a God behind it, that makes sense. Intelligence, omniscience, and power. When God spoke the universe into existence, that makes sense. An almighty, intelligent God caused the world to come into being. We don't appeal to chance, because chance is nothing. Can't explain anything. It's not a substance. The fossil record, now, what does it show? Darwin, when he wrote his Origin of Species, said that over time, the fossil record would show intermediaries between one life form, let's say a dog becoming a rabbit or a dog becoming a fowl or something of that nature. The idea is that the fossil record, we have millions of fossils now. We still can't find any intermediary form that is unmistakably one form changing slowly into another form. So let's just look at the number 4 now, Brother Ratchie, please, in terms of the fossil record.
Well, a lot of people seem to believe that fossils take a very long time to form, thousands, millions of years in order to form, but the existence of a fossil by itself is actually proof that something happened very, very fast. When an organism dies, there's all parts of the environment that are trying to destroy it. There's the weather, there's erosion, there's scavengers and other animals that are going to come and tear apart your fossil. But as soon as the organism dies, if it's covered by sediment and protected from the environment, then the process of fossilization can start. And we know from modern examples that fossilization, as far as converting the bone or the shell into rock, can actually happen very, very fast, in a matter of months. Since we know that fossils have to form quickly in order to become fossils at all, we also know, therefore, that the rocks that the fossils are formed in must themselves have been formed quickly as well. So creationists who study the geological record and the geological column can agree with some of our evolutionary colleagues on something: the order of the fossils. But what we're going to disagree with is about the ages that my evolutionary colleagues ascribe to those rocks, not the order of them themselves.
Charles Darwin said the fossil record would show evolution, but in fact, at the time it didn't. And he predicted it would, but you know it doesn't. And the prediction that he made has not been borne out by research since. We've found millions of fossils, and we do not find the fine gradation of change of one basic kind to another. And in fact, it's a huge problem for the whole idea of evolution.
It is the big level differences between animals, these phylum level differences, that should give us our best example of evolutionary transitions. You need more transitions in order to split from something like a jellyfish into something like an arthropod, like a lobster. It's precisely these big level differences that have the smallest amount of evidential basis for Darwinian evolution. Well, one of the most intractable problems in paleontology is one of Darwin's own devising. When Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, he knew of a group of fossils low in the geological column called the Cambrian. Since Darwin believed that all animals shared common ancestors, he believed that the animals in the Cambrian must therefore have ancestors in the rocks below them. To put the Cambrian explosion in context, let's think of Earth history like a football field. On an old age system, the beginning of the Earth at one end zone is 4.5 billion years ago, and the present is at the other end zone. The Cambrian starts all the way across the field at the opposing team's 12-yard line and extends for 1 full yard. The Cambrian explosion, though, where we see the first appearance of all of these different animal body plans, these phylum-level divisions, happens in just 4 inches. It's not even the whole yard. So in the 4 inches that is the Cambrian explosion, this narrow slice of time in geology, we have the first appearance of animals that are as different from each other as mollusks and clamshells from jellyfish. These are huge anatomical differences that are supposed to happen in a window of time where in other areas you're arguing about whether or not humans and gorillas shared a common ancestor. A small difference anatomically compared to the huge body-level divisions that we see first appear in the Cambrian.
But you know, there are no precursors to the Cambrian fauna in the Precambrian rocks. The Precambrian supposedly represents a couple of billion years of history, yet it shows nothing more than blue-green algae and bacteria, maybe a few other things thrown in late in the Precambrian. Yeah, so one thing we hear a lot is that maybe the ancestors of the Cambrian fauna were soft bodies, so they didn't leave any remains behind to be fossilized. And Darwin in The Origin of Species, he said, "No organism wholly soft can be preserved." But that is nonsense, for even he knew fossil sand ripples and even raindrops were preserved in the rocks. And today, we have fossils of jellyfish, of worms, right from the fossil record.
While the Cambrian explosion stands as strong evidence against evolutionary predictions, it's actually exactly what creationists would expect out of the fossil record. If Noah's flood created the bulk of our fossils and sedimentary rocks, then we would expect that as the flood starts in the ocean and drives its way on towards the continents, that it would pick up these marine ecosystems, burying them in sediment and driving them up onto the land where they would become fossilized and become sedimentary rocks. The thing about the Cambrian explosion that's so interesting is that when we look and see in those first 4 inches, when all these different animal phyla appear, it's a complex and complete ecosystem. This isn't a single organism that shows up and then later on another organism and then later another. It's an entire suite of organisms that were in one place, were catastrophically buried, and their remains were driven onto the continents.
The basic features of the fossil record are sudden appearance. There's an absence of transitions leading to the first appearance of a particular kind of animal. And the other feature is that fossils basically stay the same within their kinds. There might be some variations, but they're small compared with what is to be anticipated if evolution from amoebas to people happened.
Evolutionists argue that the fossil record is
let's hold it
incomplete,
there, thanks.
but this is...
So I'll pick up back at all right, informational 4.3, informational complexity. How could and did it arise? We take our second to last clip. I think I want to show you a slice of radiometric dating, how unscientific or imprecise it really is, though part of a scientific discipline, since that was raised last week. So let's just take this one now, number 2.
Actually, I believe genetics is the most powerful argument against evolution. And the reason is that when you look at the genes of things, I mean, they're transmitted and passed on generation to generation, but the changes you see, the mutations, actually destroy the genes.
What biologist does is actually it studies the genetics, the genetic information, the transfer of genetic information, the control of genetic information, or in my field, biotechnology, how to change that intelligently to create something novel. Darwinism has nothing to do there. The random approach produces nothing. Randomness cannot compete with intelligence in understanding nature.
I organized a symposium at Cornell University, and the topic was biological information. And all of the scientists agreed on one thing, and that is that information is fundamental to our understanding of what life is. Information is, in a sense, what makes life life. And I'm not just talking about information like data. I'm talking about information networks, communication networks within the cell.
One of the most amazing information transfer systems in the cell involves the way proteins are encoded in and decoded from strands of DNA. Starting out with these long, fragile, sticky strings of DNA, an amazing machine called an RNA polymerase zips down the strand, opens up the coils, and copies the DNA into another molecule called RNA. And RNA uses a slightly different language convention. It still has 4 letters like DNA, but instead of A, C, G, and T, it has A, C, G, and U. The RNA then leaves the nucleus and another amazing machine attaches to it. It's called a ribosome, and it is in charge of translating from the language of the RNA with its 4 letter bases to the language of proteins with their 20 different amino acids. 3 bases on the bottom of the tRNA match to 3 letter groups on the RNA. On the other end are amino acids which pop off as they're attached to the growing protein strand. But the process isn't finished because most proteins need help folding properly. And that's facilitated by little molecules called chaperones. They attach to and protect the unfolded protein as it's transported to a watermelon-shaped molecule called a chaperonin, which folds the protein into its final form. From DNA to protein is an incredibly complex process that uses precise and complex machines to translate between 2 completely unrelated languages, the linear code of the DNA world to the 3-dimensional code of the protein world.
If we look into these complexities and into these codes in the genome and in the working together, the operating system in the cells, then it is very hard to exclude that there hasn't been intelligence behind it. And I think that is what the creationists recognize in these systems.
How did this incredible communication network that's even present in the simplest cell, how did it arise? Well, you need 3 things for it to arise. Number 1, you need a language. You can't even conceive of a communication system until there's a language, because there's senders and receivers in the cell. Secondly, you need communication channels or networks. It's a little bit like the hardware that enables the internet. And thirdly, you have to have meaningful information that is being translated into language and communicated through the channels of communication.
Information is at the heart of cellular function. Did you know the cell even has a post office? They're these specialized molecules called kinesins, and they're in charge of delivering packets of material to different parts of the cell. But in their journey, they go to pre-specified destinations. Without that addressing system, the cell couldn't even work.
Information, communication, and language. They're non-material entities. They arise through intelligence, and they're mutually defining. So you can't have one without the other. They all have to arise at the same time.
Yet the information in the genome is much more complicated than we first thought. In fact, the genome contains multiple levels, multiple dimensions of information. Start with a 1-dimensional string called DNA. Upon this, there's this huge 2-dimensional network of interactions amongst different parts of the genome with each other. Then we have to fold the DNA into a 3-dimensional shape that changes shape in the 4th dimension, time. To make it even more complicated, it's now known that most parts of the genome code for more than one thing at the same time.
Overlapping codes are almost impossible to improve upon, because if you improve one of the codes, you are destroying or disrupting one of the other codes. So what I mean by overlapping codes, of course, is that the same sequence of DNA has more than one message. And that is now very, very clear.
Most of these overlapping codes are found in the so-called junk DNA. Since only 2% of the genome actually codes for protein, scientists decided decades ago that the rest is unimportant, leftover garbage from our evolutionary history. But that view is now seen to be quite naive, as the genomics revolution has shown that non-protein coding portions of the genome are actually quite active, not for creating proteins, but for creating something similar to DNA called RNA, which is one of the cellular workhorses and which often affects the production of protein down the line. The junk DNA also contains lots of other codes for controlling many different functions in the cell.
So basically, a lot of scientists now understand that the junk DNA paradigm was profoundly wrong and will be recorded in history as one of the greatest blunders of science. And it was driven by an ideological commitment to the Darwinian concept.
Similar to the junk DNA myth is the
All right, now what I'm going to do is open for your questions and comments, and time allowing, we'll show you a little piece of radiometric dating. Appealed to for millions of years, contrary to young earthers who say, well, it is not a precise science and you have to watch how you use it. All right, so we'll take your questions, your comments, your observations now, and then we'll use the remaining few minutes to look at radiometric dating. Anybody?
Rev, just to ask you to just give a little, to just give a little simplified explanation as to how we move from evolution to intelligent design. What was the rationale behind the concept?
Well, people who believe in creation based on the Bible have been attacked by natural scientists, quote unquote, because not all natural scientists are against creation or the Bible's version of how things came to be. So they are saying, all right, how do we respond to help these guys to understand that their theory or fact, as they call it, is defective at fundamental pieces of points in the theory. And so intelligent design became a term, I think it was first coined by William Dembski, a natural scientist himself. And so it is adding scientific language to the language of creation in Genesis, so that the scientists who are not keen on reading Bible might understand better what creation scientists are trying to convey to them. And now they're hard pressed to refute or counter, even partially, the most learned intelligent design specialists that we have now in the world. And we need to tell our young people, don't be intimidated by...
Good evening.
Give me one sec, please, sis. Don't be intimidated by the degrees that anybody possesses. Yes. They are degree dunces, even at universities. Are they talking logically? Can they prove what they're trying to say? Or they just spit it out and you must just swallow it because you're an idiot in their lecture theater? No, I am mischievous. I ask questions of anybody, no matter who you claim you are. I'm going to challenge you. Are you thinking logically, critically, or do you expect me just to swallow it because you are supposed to be allegedly brighter than everybody else around? Yes, this sister was trying, if I read the voice properly.
Okay, that was Sister Diana, but Sister Georgia also has her hand up. So Sister Diana first, and then Sister Georgia.
Sister Georgia and
all right, thank
Sister
you.
Georgia first.
Yeah, Sister go.
Okay, sorry, Sister Diana. Then Sister Georgia go first, and then you come.
No worries. So at least I can see one or two of the faces of the persons that are speaking. Thank you. Yes, this is Queen Georgiana, I call her.
Yeah, just that this is Georgia,
representative,
Georgia.
Okay, Orville, go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, I'm still not clear, Clinton, from the piece you played with respect to the carbon dating and how do we arrive at the age of the Earth, because I'm one of those. I'm one of those who do not believe, even for a minute, that the Earth is just 15,000 years old. Okay. But what they were saying doesn't give me no concrete thing to how do I arrive at the age of the Earth unless I just believe by faith what the Bible says. And unfortunately, I don't believe that. It didn't.
The Bible does not give any dating. Christian science assign dating. So we will get that piece for you shortly, Orwell, in the radio. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Anytime.
Sister Diane. Diana, Sister Diane.
Yes, good evening again.
Good evening.
Yes, good evening again. Intelligent design, is that a reference to God?
It is
God
a reference. It's a scientific term substitute for God. Because you mentioned God, they say you're going to come with something full religious. But the challenge is, okay, how could all of this come about minus intelligence? And no scientist, no matter how rabidly anti-theistic they are, could argue that the evolutionary process has any mind, has any logos, any controlling factor to indicate where it is going and how it would end. And it should puzzle scientists, but it hasn't, because they're anti-God. So intelligent design theorists have used intelligent design as a kind of a cover for their view in creation by Almighty God, a sovereign, intelligent God, an infinite personal God at that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Anybody else?
Yes, Rev.
A question or comment? Yes, I see a hand.
Yeah, that would be me. This
Go
is
ahead,
Cleve.
sir.
Cleve.
Go ahead.
I'm going to start with part of a question, in that one of the clips indicated the fossils appearing together in, I don't remember the name of the period.
The Cambrian, one of the earliest periods in the fossil record, the Cambrian early.
Right.
Diversity at the earliest level.
Right. But my question for you, based on the chart, and I think we're going to get there, would suggest that this Cambrian period was somewhere around 4.5 billion years ago.
On traditional dating, right?
On traditional dating, okay. So that traditional dating is now up for question based on...
Right.
Okay.
The radiometric clip that you're going to see very shortly.
Okay, now in that Cambrian period, it would suggest that, why did they stretch it over that 1 yard box if all the fossils appeared only in a 4-inch period? What was the significance of that huge period?
The American football illustration is just an illustration.
Right.
Maybe if they had the soccer field, it might be better. I don't understand American football still. I don't try. I don't like the sport, so I don't even try to understand it. But it's just an illustration he's using. If you understand football analogy, American football that is not soccer, then it might make more sense to you. So disregard the illustration and watch for the pointers in the radiometric dating clip.
Okay. There's a comment in the chat I can read for you. Sister Paula writes, I totally believe in God being our intelligent creator, but I'm curious about dinosaurs and skeletons, etc., that have been found. Please comment.
All right,
I'll
give you
when you finish.
A quick on that, and then I recommend you to check the website Answers in Genesis. The word dinosaur came into the English language about the late 18th century. The same entities that we call dinosaurs, the Chinese and older civilization called dragons. But if you have petroglyphs, these are drawings inside caves of the same animals that these so-called primordial or pre-human people draw on the caves. Were they impressionistic before Impressionism came into view? Or were they just reflecting as good artists what they are accustomed to seeing round about them? So dinosaurs and humans live together. It's just that we have been confused by scientists and by the negative view that they have of early humans, as if they were idiots. They didn't have much sense. But they are petroglyphs. Who drew them? The animals or humans? And they look like the animals that we call dinosaurs now, which the older Chinese civilization would call dragons. Answers in Genesis has a very good article on that. I would recommend you trust it for more information on that.
Okay, and her second question is,
sure.
Last week reference was made to someone who said that evolution follows creation. Please comment.
Evolution follows
creation.
Well, I don't know what the person meant by that statement, unless they're saying, all right, we believe that creation was the first, quote unquote, let's say, theory of origins. And then later in life, people turned against that earlier view and they came up with evolution.
No, I think they were referring to the fact that there have been changes in the structure of various animals or humans over a period of time, which could be considered a form of evolution. I think that's where that question.
I think they're referring more or less to mutation, Rev.
Well, mutations destroy information or disperse information, and so you have the fact that you have speciation or changes in kinds. A dog cannot ever give rise to a cat unless cat information is in the gene pool of a dog. Can't happen. cannot happen at all. It does make sense. But when you read it, Genesis talk about God created this one to give rise to its kind. That's a suggestion of speciation, what we would call speciation today. Not a problem at all for either the creationists or the evolutionists, but the evolutionists would have a problem. How do you get the information in the gene pool of one organism that is going to change to another? So for instance, they say like you can have fish becoming giving rise to humans. You know, the composition of a human body radically different from the composition of a fish. How do you get information in the fish's gene pool to give rise to a radically different organism called man? It just can't happen. If the information is not in the gene pool, the genetic structure cannot give rise to anything but its own kind. So speciation, giving rise to your own kind makes sense. With the creation document is more sensible. With evolution, you have no mind. You only do it by mutation, which destroys or diminishes information. How do you get it to progress, to evolve, as opposed to devolve?
I've also heard it been explained in the way in maturity and how we reproduce in a more sustainable way rather than before. Would that have been social, environmental, or genetically linked? Those are some of the issues that I hear flying around.
Well, from my recollection of biology, which I failed at O-level, though I'm married to a professor of biology, I begged her to let me redeem myself by going to her class. She said, you can come and do the course in my, but you're not sitting in my class. She don't want to embarrass her husband, I suppose. But the point is, acquired characteristics are not heritable. Yeah. The gene pool determines who you will be from that so-called zygote stage, where you can't, some people claim they can't discern, and it's a non-person, an illogical view in my view. The issue is you're determined genetically by the information in your gene pool. I happen to be a musician, not because music was in my gene pool. My father and my mother, for the best I know, couldn't play anything at all. But I acquired the skill over time. But acquired characteristics, I gather, are not heritable. They can't be passed on in the gene pool. They can only be learned by seeing somebody who has those skills, and you're seeing and you're being taught to get that, but it's not heritable unless it's in the gene pool.
Okay.
All right, let's just, I know you have many more questions, but I am very fussy about time. Let's use the last, 9 minutes radiometric dating, Brother Rattray, please. And then guys, you have the material, so you can always arrange sessions. And please beg your science youngsters and the teachers of science who are Christians to watch the whole DVD. Absolutely riveting. Go, Brother Rattray, please.
Many people are of the opinion that scientists can make direct measurements using these techniques of billions of years ages for rocks. And they use this then to discredit the history of the Bible. And this is really not the case. The physics behind radiometric dating is relatively straightforward. We have a radioactive element called a parent, which transforms over time into a non-radioactive element called the daughter. And this happens with a characteristic rate referred to as a half-life. That's the length of time that it takes half the parent element to transform into an equal amount of the daughter element. So over time, the amount of parent in the rock decreases and the amount of daughter in the rock increases. The scientists can use very powerful machines to measure either directly the amounts of these two elements or their ratio, and this ratio then can be used in a theoretical calculation along with the half-life to calculate an alleged age for the sample. Let me give you some examples. Radioactive carbon-14 decays to nitrogen-14. Uranium decays to lead. Potassium-40 decays to argon-40. And all of these are used in radiometric dating.
We don't actually measure the age with these methods. We actually are measuring the amount of these isotopes in the rocks or fossils. And it's an interpretation using certain assumptions about these amounts that give us the age. But the age is actually not measured directly.
For many radiometric dating techniques, one of the assumptions is that there is no daughter element present in the rock when it is formed, which of course we can't know unless we're actually there and can take a sample of the rock immediately after it was formed and do an analysis. Now, a small amount of daughter present at the time the rock is formed, if the rock is actually billions of years old, will not have a very significant impact on the calculated age. But if the rock is actually only a few thousand years old, even a very, very tiny amount of daughter present at the time the rock is formed will have a huge impact and give the rock appearances of being billions of years old. Another assumption in radiometric dating is that the rate at which the parent element transforms to the daughter element has been constant over time. Now, this has generally been borne out by experiments in the past, but recently some scientists in the US and Europe determined that the transformation rate of at least some elements, notably cobalt-60, cesium-137, silicon-32, and radium-226, do indeed vary with time. Now, they don't understand why this is, but they have noted that the rate varies with the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Now, the importance of this with respect to radiometric dating is that the assumption that the transformation rate is constant is clearly not true in the short term, and therefore may well be not true in the long term, which of course would invalidate the calculated ages. Some additional evidence for this is an experiment that was spearheaded by the Institute for Creation Research, in which some scientists found zircon crystals with unexpectedly large amounts of helium in them. Now, helium is a byproduct of the decay of uranium-238 to lead-206, and based on the ratio of lead to uranium in these zircon crystals, the calculated radiometric age was 1.5 billion years. But helium escapes from these crystals very quickly, so if the crystals really were 1.5 billion years old, then essentially all of the helium should have escaped. So the large amounts of helium that were found indicate that the crystals can't be 1.5 billion years old, and maybe the transformation from uranium to lead-206 was faster in the past. A third assumption is that the rock has remained a closed system from the time of its formation. What that means is that no parent element or daughter element has been either added to or removed from the rock during its history by any number of potential chemical or physical processes. For radiometric dating to be valid, all of these assumptions must be true. If they are not, the results are not reliable.
The standard way that an old-age geologist provides a date for a fossil, say that dinosaurs died out 65 million years old, is not by dating the fossil itself, but by dating the rocks that are nearby the fossil and using the dates of the rocks as a bracket. They'll use radioactive dating methods to say that this rock is 65 million years old, there's dinosaurs underneath them, therefore the dinosaurs can be no younger than 65 million years old. An interesting question to ask would be whether or not radioactive dating methods that are applied to the fossils actually correspond to the radioactive dating methods that apply to the rocks. If the two are in agreement, then perhaps an old-age geologist has a strong argument for the age in fossils. But if you get two different ages for things that are supposed to be the same age, then either one is right, the other is right, or neither one is correct.
Many people think carbon dating can be used to date things that are millions or even billions of years old. However, because of its half-life, carbon dating can only be used theoretically to date things that are at most a few tens of thousands of years old. Because after that length of time, so much of the carbon-14 is decayed that there's not enough of it left to be detected, even with today's modern instruments.
If the whole Earth was pure carbon-14, it could only last about 1 million years before it's all gone and we couldn't detect it. And yet, we repeatedly find carbon-14 in objects which are claimed to be millions and even billions of years old, including diamonds. But the fact that we're finding carbon-14 shows they can't be millions or billions of years old. So carbon-14 is in fact a very strong ally of the biblical timescale and strong evidence against the millions of years of evolution.
What dating of fossils has shown us over time is that there is carbon-14 in the fossil material. This is true whether or not they are fossils of mosasaurs, or fossils of seashells, or fossils of petrified wood, or any of the varieties of fossil fuels that we have, especially coal and oil and natural gas. Samples of these have been analyzed since the 1970s and consistently show us ages that there shouldn't be if they were in fact millions of years old. Coal is a particularly interesting case for carbon-14. Coal is the remains of plants that have been compressed, and so they were part of the ecosystem and had an active connection to carbon-14. It's found globally, and it's found throughout the geological record. When creation scientists sampled coal seams from different places and analyzed them for the amount of carbon-14, they found that regardless of where they were collected or from what layers of geology they were found, they all registered statistically the same amount of carbon-14. So with the coal seams, rather than providing evidence of gradual deposition and formation of coal over tens or hundreds of millions of years, the identical amounts of carbon-14 in all of the samples that were collected actually shows that they were all buried within the recent past.
Even though radiometric data seems like a very scientific process, we've seen from measurements that it produces highly erroneous results. And due to the unknowable assumptions that are behind its normal application, it is unreliable and untrustworthy in many cases.
All right, just hold there. Let me make a final comment suggestion. Right, a fascinating case that I have actually checked out years ago is the Mount St. Helens volcanic eruption, 1980. They collected some of the lava and the rocks spewed out and took it to a lab without identifying where they got it. And the lab identified the rock in 1980, spewed out in 1980, as millions of years old. And I gather usually when you take up a specimen to be tested by a radiometric lab, they ask you how old you think it is. Why you ask me that? You have the machines. Apply your stupid machine. Why you ask me foolishness? Tell me by using your machines. But the idea is that they ask you so they have a rough gauge of what would satisfy you as a person trying to find out the age of a particular rock. Check it out online. Mount St. Helens volcano, 1980. All of the things come out in 1980, and yet they date it millions of years ago. So I am suggesting very strongly that you all find some time to watch each segment of the DVD to the fullest, and invite the Christians who are doing, the youngsters who are doing science in high school, university, and the people who teach them. If you have a lecturer in geology, a lecturer in evolution, let them watch it through and have a lovely discussion. If you need my help to answer some of the questions, I'm available. But I promise Pastor this will be part one if he wants me to do part two, which I have, or I could just send it simply as an additional handout. I'm awaiting a response from him. Once he leaves the retreat, then he will have the time to respond. But thank you all so very much for putting up with me.
Before you go, Reb, sorry. One of our viewers on YouTube, Sister Andrea, has a question for you.
Sure.
Isn't it at least a part of the issue which arises in these so-called scientific challenges, and scientific is in quotation marks, the scientific challenges to the biblical narrative and or draw to it ideological commitment in error to Darwinian theory?
Oh yes, we swallow without realizing it, and I'm not blaming the bulk of Christians who do this. We swallow worldview ideas from TV and from where we congregate in terms of exchanging ideas, and we are not sufficiently schooled in the Bible. How many of the average Christians attend Bible study or even Sunday morning or Saturday morning service? Precious few, comparatively speaking. I told the last circuit I pastored in Slagville, first sermon, I said, brethren, look, your pastor is half crazy. If you want to increase the fraction over time, then search for the evidence. I tell them I do unconventional things. For instance, I recommended to pastor a video called The Privileged Planet. I would play that on a Sunday morning rather than preach, and then have a discussion after we have watched it. Fascinating material, very well done for students in science and lecturers in science to watch and observe. That even though there are billions of, and the new what they call telescope thing is going to provide interesting and fascinating discussion. Billions of stars out there. So you think, all right, a whole heap of them out there. Therefore, the possibility of life being on one of those planets is a reasonable assumption. Possibility needs evidence to move to probability, more evidence to move to likelihood, to move more evidence to move to certainty. But it's not just add water to get life. You need a number of things that are necessary for life to exist on any planet. It's not just add water. So we just have to be schooled in the Bible, know the word well, and we can use our knowledge of the word to raise the questions of those who are proposing contrary views, contrary to the Bible. Might I just do a vulgar thing? I told Pastor, and he says I should tell you what I offer. I just sent around an apologetics course, could be a seminar, could be split into seminars to several institutions, including JTS, CGST, and others in the Caribbean area. And I recommend that denominations could take aspects of it and just run a seminar. People would have to pay for the seminar because that's how I live. I don't get any pension from anybody, not the US government, not JBU. So what I do is how I live. And I charge a basic fee per hour for what I do. So you can request that. I think I sent it to Pastor. So you can request a look at it and then talk with Pastor if you think part of it could be done as a public seminar. I have a full-blown public lecture on the existence of God, nature's evidence, multimedia with video clips involved in it. So thanks very much for hearing
I think
me.
there's another question. Auntie Paula,
Sure.
you have a question?
Yeah, there are two hands up.
Yes, thank you for recognizing me. Just wanted to make a quick comment that my son is 24, and when he was in prep school, he used a book during a Becca learning that spoke of God being our intelligent creator and cited some examples among animals and birds. So one was a bird whose claws on the feet curve all the way around. And that's because that bird sleeps upside down. So when the bird is on the wire up in the air and it falls asleep, it just turns upside down. But the claws are naturally curved, so he won't fall and die. And then there was another one where the male of a species, beautiful, colorful, and the female is drab, because that species, they don't fly. So when the female has the tiny eggs, she sits on them. And then when predators are coming, the male would come and lead the predator away from the female, the mommy, who is hatching the eggs. So those were like the little things that were so big that, we were being reminded of, that our intelligent creator never just fling us out there, or no ball of fire just exploded, but everything was properly and well designed. Yeah. When you watch geographical TV or whatever, you see how people still trying to figure out what is under the sea, and all know them can't get it right. I rest my case. Amen.
Yeah, and if your son is, you said your son was 24 now?
Yes, Rev.
Well, when he was younger, he might have found out. Answers in Genesis has excellent material in that regard. The major mysteries in animals that puzzle even evolutionists. They don't conclude that there's a mind behind it, but they can't explain. Like even the doctor bird, the speed of its wings, or it can stay almost stationary in the air. How is it able to do that without the built-in mechanism in its genetic makeup for it to be able to do that? Answers in Genesis is an excellent site to check, just like Creation Ministries International or creation.com for short. Fascinating sites which are Christian in orientation.
Brother Cleve also has a question.
Sure.
Right. You alluded to something I was going to ask you before I even did, but I'm going to put you on the spot now specifically.
No problem.
Do you personally, because I don't see it addressed in the Bible anywhere, believe that we're alone in this universe?
Well, I do believe that, simply because the requirements for life, carbon-based life as we are, is so rare.
But wouldn't that be based on evolution's theory?
No, just general astronomical science, that the requirements for carbon-based life keeps increasing the more research they do. And on Privileged Planet, you'll find a clip on that from two non-Christian scientists, Guillermo, I've forgotten the fellow's last name, but two of them. And the requirements for life, you just think is like, you just need water and, you know, certain gases. That's not it at all. And I would recommend, as I said, crazy me, that the Privileged Planet be shown one Sunday morning at Grace.
Okay, Rev,
Pastor just need to pronounce a benediction.
Okay.
So thanks, guys. It's very late
Thank
for me
you.
here. It's
Yes.
after 10. I usually sleep by 8:30 unless I have to do a Bible study. Like tonight, I did one in South Florida at a Baptist church. Then had a little break in between and then came to you guys. So the Lord bless. And if I am needed, I'm available.
Okay.
Just say,
Well,
Lord
good to
bless.
see you again.
All right.
And
Take care.
thank you very much for sharing with us tonight.
My joy and pleasure, sis.